I paid my family's bills, then I discovered they mocked me behind my back. One evening, Mara's husband called me unexpectedly. He had been absent from their lives for years, but apparently he had heard about the birthday incident and wanted to discuss it. I agreed to meet him at a quiet park, curious about his intentions. He arrived looking apprehensive but sincere. "I didn't know it had gotten this bad," he said. "I'm sorry for not being there, for letting things spiral. I just want to understand what happened." I listened as he spoke, his words revealing both regret and confusion. It was a different kind of interaction, one not tainted by manipulation or mockery. I realized that even amid betrayal, some bridges could be repaired, or at least understood. But I kept my guard up, responding carefully. "It's not about blame anymore," I said. "It's about recognizing patterns, seeing how actions have consequences, and ensuring that trust is respected moving forward." Meanwhile, Mara's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She oscillated between feigned contrition and subtle attempts to manipulate me again. I remained vigilant, never letting her actions dictate my emotions. Every small lie I caught, every half-truth I discovered, was quietly documented, a reminder that the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. The most surprising development came from my parents. After weeks of awkward interactions, they approached me one evening, hesitant but sincere. We didn't realize," my mother said. "We were wrong. We see now how much you've done and how little credit you've received. We want to make things right." My father nodded silently, eyes heavy with regret. It was a tentative olive branch, a recognition of years of ignorance. I accepted it cautiously, aware that forgiveness would be gradual and conditional. But even as I acknowledged their words, a part of me remained wary. The past couldn't be erased, and trust, once broken, required more than apologies. It required proof through consistent actions. I had changed the dynamics within my family, but I had also changed myself. I was no longer blindly loyal, no longer a passive participant in my own exploitation. I had emerged stronger, more aware, and undeniably in control. Weeks turned into months, and Mara's family adapted to the new reality. The shift in dynamics was palpable. They no longer assumed my generosity, no longer treated me as an endless resource, and no longer dismissed my presence or opinions. Yet, despite this visible change, I sensed underlying tension, an unspoken fear that I could expose more if provoked. I didn't intend to act recklessly, but the quiet power I wielded now was undeniable. Mara herself became a study in contradictions. She oscillated between attempts to charm me, small gestures of false sincerity, and passive-aggressive comments meant to test my patience. One afternoon, she asked for help with a supposedly urgent financial issue. I calmly requested documentation and details, knowing that anything less would reveal dishonesty. Her hesitation was palpable. The lie she had relied upon for years had begun to crumble under scrutiny. "Why are you questioning everything now?" she asked, frustration creeping in her voice. I thought you cared." I met her gaze evenly. "I do care," I said, "but care without accountability is exploitation. I've learned that the hard way. I won't be deceived again." Her face paled, and for the first time, I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, not from vengeance, but from empowerment. The turning point came unexpectedly. Mara's brother, emboldened by the recent shift in the family, attempted to undermine me again, subtly suggesting that I was overstepping my bounds. I had anticipated this, of course. Calmly, I confronted him privately, presenting evidence of his own complicity in manipulation and deceit. The confrontation was quiet, but the effect was immediate. He left the conversation with a rare humility, aware that the balance of power had irrevocably changed. Meanwhile, I began to reconnect with parts of my life I had neglected: friends, personal goals, and aspirations that had been sidelined while I managed the chaos within Mara's family. There was a liberating sense of autonomy in knowing I could choose where my energy went, who I trusted, and how I spent my time. For years, I had been trapped in a cycle of loyalty and exploitation. Now, I was free to redefine my relationships and assert my boundaries without guilt. The next challenge emerged during a family gathering for a wedding. Mara had attempted to manipulate the seating arrangements to her advantage, subtly isolating me from certain relatives. I noticed immediately. Instead of reacting impulsively, I played along, quietly rearranging myself within the social space, ensuring that my interactions were observed and respected. Mara's frustration was visible. She realized she no longer controlled the narrative. During the reception, a conversation with an extended cousin revealed just how deeply Mara's family had underestimated me. "I can't believe you stayed quiet all these years," the cousin whispered. "We didn't know how much they were using you. You've changed everything." The word struck me, not with pride, but with validation. I had endured mockery, betrayal, and manipulation, and I had emerged unbroken, strategic, and respected. That evening, as I watched the festivities unfold, I reflected on the journey. The betrayal, the exposure, the strategic confrontation, it had all led to a moment of quiet triumph. Mara's family had learned, painfully and undeniably, that their assumptions about me were wrong. I had reclaimed my dignity, set boundaries, and forced acknowledgement without losing my composure. The balance had shifted, and I knew, deep down, that it would never be the same again. Even with the victory at the wedding, I knew that real change would take time. Mara's family could adjust their behavior superficially, but deep-seated habits and old patterns die hard. I remained vigilant, observing, recording, and analyzing every interaction. My goal wasn't vengeance anymore. It was ensuring that respect and accountability became the standard, not the exception. Mara, predictably, tried to regain influence subtly. She would make veiled comments about past mistakes, attempt to guilt me for perceived slights, or play the role of victim in front of other relatives. But I had grown adept at navigating these manipulations. I listened calmly, documented inconsistencies, and responded in ways that were firm but composed. I didn't shout, I didn't attack personally, but every response underscored that I would no longer be treated as expendable. One day, a small but symbolic moment occurred. Mara asked me to watch her children for an afternoon while she ran errands. In the past, I would have agreed instantly, never questioning her schedule or intentions. This time, I stipulated clear boundaries and expectations, ensuring she understood that my generosity was conditional on transparency and respect. She agreed reluctantly, clearly unaccustomed to me asserting myself in such a way. The children, blissfully unaware of the tension, thrived in the environment I provided. We baked, played games, and read stories together. The contrast between their innocence and the adults' duplicity was striking. I realized that part of my journey wasn't just about reclaiming respect. It was about shielding the next generation from the same manipulation and exploitation I had endured. I wanted them to see loyalty, kindness, and generosity modeled with dignity, not taken for granted. Meanwhile, my parents began to engage differently. My mother apologized for her earlier complicity, admitting that she had underestimated my judgment and resilience. My father, more reserved, acknowledged my perspective in subtle ways, respecting the boundaries I had set. It was a slow, deliberate recalibration of family dynamics, and I welcomed it, understanding that change, when forced by confrontation, often takes time to cement itself fully. The culmination of these subtle shifts became evident during a family reunion. Mara attempted, as she often did, to orchestrate the event according to her preferences, but I had anticipated her moves. I took a quiet leadership role, ensuring the event ran smoothly, guiding interactions and fostering harmony. Observing her frustration was almost poetic. Her influence had waned, her manipulations had failed, and the family, consciously or unconsciously, deferred to my judgment. That night, as I walked home alone, I reflected on how far I had come. The betrayal, the years of mockery, the emotional and financial exploitation, they had all been catalysts. I realized that I had learned to observe, to act strategically, and to assert myself without succumbing to anger or desperation. I had transformed adversity into strength, humiliation into empowerment, and betrayal into clarity. The path ahead was still uncertain. Mara and her family could attempt subtle manipulations, test boundaries, or challenge my authority. But I knew one thing. I was no longer a passive participant in their drama. I had reclaimed control, and the lessons of patience, observation, and calculated response had made me untouchable in ways they could not anticipate. Months passed, and the tension within the family evolved into a fragile equilibrium. Mara's attempts to manipulate me became increasingly transparent, and even she seemed to realize that her old tactics no longer worked. Every conversation, every request, every subtle attempt at control was met with calm scrutiny. I responded thoughtfully, letting the weight of evidence and clarity of boundaries speak louder than anger or confrontation ever could. One afternoon, Mara invited me to a brunch under the guise of reconciliation. The offer seemed innocent enough, but I suspected an ulterior motive. I agreed to attend, not out of trust, but to observe. As we sat across from each other, the atmosphere was tense. Mara attempted small talk, peppering the conversation with compliments and casual apologies. I listened carefully, acknowledging her words without surrendering my own position. "You've changed," she said, her voice soft, almost admiring. "I don't know if it's respect or fear, but you've made everyone stop and notice you." I held my gaze, letting the silence speak. "It's neither," I replied calmly. "It's clarity. I've learned what I will and won't tolerate. I've learned how to protect myself and those I care about. That's all." Her eyes widened slightly, realizing that she could no longer manipulate the narrative. I wasn't playing into her games anymore. The subtle power she had relied upon for years had evaporated. She leaned back, visibly frustrated, and for the first time in our interactions, I saw vulnerability in her demeanor, a flicker of realization that she could no longer control me or dismiss my authority. At the same brunch, Mara's brother tried a feeble attempt to justify past behavior, claiming that they had only acted out of concern for me, that they had been protecting the family's resources. I listened patiently, then calmly presented the documented evidence I had collected, recorded conversations, inconsistencies, and the undeniable truth of their manipulation. His face went pale, and the words faltered before dying entirely in the space between us. By the end of the meal, Mara and her brother were subdued, their usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. Even the other family members, who had quietly observed, seemed to acknowledge the shift. There was a new understanding, one that required respect, transparency, and accountability. They could no longer act without consideration of my presence, and that unspoken recognition carried immense power. After the brunch, I walked away feeling a strange mixture of relief and solemnity. I had not shouted, not humiliated, and not sought revenge in the traditional sense. I had simply reclaimed control through patience, strategy, and undeniable truth. The family dynamics had shifted permanently, and I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I realized that standing firm, documenting everything, and asserting boundaries had been far more effective than any immediate confrontation or emotional outburst could have been. Yet, even as I celebrated this quiet victory, I knew the work was not entirely finished. Mara and her family had been forced to recognize my authority, but respect, trust, and genuine change would take consistent effort. I was prepared for that challenge. For the first time in years, I felt empowered, aware, and untouchable. Not because I had humiliated anyone, but because I had understood the rules of engagement and had finally played by them expertly. The weeks after the brunch marked a new chapter in my interactions with Mara's family. Their behavior had shifted from overt manipulation to cautious civility. They were no longer attempting to test my patience openly, but subtle challenges persisted. Mara, especially, continued to probe, trying small, indirect ways to regain control. Yet I was vigilant. Every word, every gesture, every request was filtered through a lens of observation and verification. One evening, Mara approached me with a seemingly innocent favor. "I just need you to help with a small thing," she said, her tone light, almost pleading. I paused, examining her closely. "What exactly do you need?" I asked, forcing clarity. She hesitated, then outlined a vague financial arrangement with loopholes and unclear details. I raised an eyebrow. "I'll help," I said slowly, "but I need all the details documented. Every expense, every transaction. No assumptions, no shortcuts." Her face fell. She had expected me to comply blindly, as I had in the past. That expectation had vanished. This shift was not just about authority. It was about self-preservation. I had learned that generosity without boundaries left one vulnerable to exploitation. I had also discovered that exposing dishonesty through evidence and calm confrontation was more effective than confrontation through anger. Mara's subtle attempts to manipulate me now failed because I had created a system where transparency and accountability were non-negotiable. My parents began to mirror this shift in dynamics as well. They started consulting me on decisions, asking for my perspective and respecting my input. It was not perfect reconciliation. There was still tension, a lingering awareness of past mistakes, but the foundation for a more honest relationship was being laid. Their behavior suggested that respect, once earned through deliberate action, could indeed change long-standing patterns. Meanwhile, Mara's children continued to see me as a reliable presence in their lives. I focused on cultivating that trust and loyalty, ensuring that they would not grow up in the shadow of deception and exploitation. I became a role model, demonstrating that kindness and generosity must be paired with boundaries and self-respect. Then, unexpectedly, I received a message from a distant relative who had been observing these dynamics from afar. "I've been following what's been happening," the message read. "You've handled things with intelligence and restraint. Most people would have lost their temper. Most people would have allowed themselves to be used. You've done what I never thought possible." The acknowledgement was affirming, a reminder that my strategy, calm, patient, and evidence-based, had resonated beyond just immediate family. By now, I realized that the most potent lesson of all was not revenge. It was awareness and assertiveness. Mara's family had learned not only the consequences of their actions, but also the limits of my patience and the power of calm determination. I had transformed betrayal into empowerment, humiliation into strategic clarity, and manipulation into an opportunity to redefine the family dynamic entirely. Months continued to pass, and with each encounter, the tension gradually eased, but respect remained firmly established. Mara's family no longer tried to manipulate situations or test boundaries. Mara herself had grown quieter, more cautious, yet there were fleeting moments where her old behaviors surfaced in subtle ways. Each time, I responded with measured calm, never giving her the satisfaction of a reaction, letting her realize that control had permanently shifted. One day, Mara came to me in private, her voice soft and hesitant. I've been thinking," she began, "about everything that happened, about how I treated you. I want to try to make amends in a real way this time." I studied her, carefully noting her body language, the sincerity, or lack thereof, in her tone. I didn't answer immediately. Silence can be a powerful test, revealing true intent. She shifted nervously, then finally sighed. "I understand if you don't believe me. I just want to do better." I finally spoke, calmly but firmly. "It's not about blind forgiveness. It's about consistent action, transparency, and respect. Words alone mean nothing. I'll observe, and time will show whether your intentions are genuine." She nodded, a small glimmer of understanding in her eyes. For the first time, I sensed that she recognized the depth of the lessons I had imparted, and that some part of her was ready to change. Meanwhile, I began to notice a subtle shift in the entire family structure. Where once I had been underestimated, ignored, or taken advantage of, I was now consulted, considered, and included in decisions. Even relatives who had previously dismissed me now sought my advice, demonstrating the long-term impact of my strategic approach. It was a validation of the painstaking work I had done to reclaim my dignity and authority. The real turning point came unexpectedly. A distant cousin, who had witnessed the family dynamics for years, invited me to a gathering. They expressed genuine admiration for how I had handled the entire situation. "Most people would have exploded," they said. "You didn't just survive it, you reshaped it entirely." Hearing this, I realized that my journey had not only altered the immediate family dynamic, but also sent ripples of influence across the broader network. At home, I continued nurturing personal growth and independence. I focused on projects, friendships, and aspirations that had long been neglected, ensuring that my own life was not defined solely by family dynamics. This shift reinforced a crucial lesson. Reclaiming control over my relationships with Mara's family had also empowered me to assert control over my own destiny. And yet, I remained vigilant. I had learned that even when respect is gained, old patterns can linger and deception can surface subtly. I maintained records, observations, and a clear understanding of boundaries. I had transformed from someone who had been used and mocked into someone whose presence demanded consideration and integrity, and I intended to preserve that hard-earned position. The following months were a study in controlled observation. Mara's family had learned, undeniably, that their attempts to manipulate, mock, or exploit me would no longer succeed. Yet the subtle tension in the air reminded me that old habits die slowly. Each interaction required mindfulness, careful responses, and the occasional gentle reminder of boundaries. I had transformed the power dynamics, but the work of maintaining them demanded vigilance. One evening, Mara approached me with a delicate request. "I want you to be part of the planning for the family reunion," she said, trying to sound casual, almost collaborative. In the past, this would have been another opportunity for her to assert subtle control, but I sensed the shift immediately. I agreed on one condition: full transparency in all planning and clear accountability for every task and expense. Mara hesitated, then nodded, visibly realizing that the old ways no longer worked. During the reunion, I noticed small but meaningful changes. Conversations flowed differently. People sought my input, asked my opinion, and deferred to my judgment. Mara and her brother attempted minor manipulations, but were quickly countered by my calm, strategic responses. The children, oblivious to past tensions, thrived in the inclusive and well-managed environment I helped create. I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that my efforts had transformed not just the family dynamic, but also the atmosphere of their gatherings. That night, as I walked home, I reflected on the journey. Betrayal, mockery, and exploitation had once defined my interactions with this family. Through patience, observation, documentation, and careful confrontation, I had reclaimed control and authority. I had turned humiliation into empowerment, deception into clarity, and manipulation into lessons in strategy and assertiveness. Yet I knew that true transformation went beyond authority. It required awareness and accountability. Mara had begun to grasp this, slowly learning that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned consistently and authentically. I realized that part of my victory lay not in revenge, but in demonstrating the power of measured action, patience, and integrity. Over the following weeks, I continued to assert boundaries, ensuring that generosity and kindness were met with respect rather than exploitation. Mara's family, though still navigating their own adjustments, began to acknowledge my role not as a passive participant, but as a central, respected figure within the family. The pattern was clear. Honesty, consistency, and strategic action were far more powerful than anger, confrontation, or emotional retaliation. For the first time, I felt a profound sense of agency. I had faced betrayal, humiliation, and manipulation head-on and emerged not only intact but stronger. I had learned that true power lies in awareness, in patience, and in the ability to act deliberately rather than react impulsively. Mara's family could no longer underestimate me, dismiss me, or exploit me, and that was a freedom I had earned through strategy, courage, and resilience. By now, the transformation in Mara's family was undeniable. The once dismissive glances, the whispered jokes, and the casual exploitation had all but vanished. Respect, cautious at first, had solidified into genuine acknowledgement. I noticed it in the smallest details. The way Mara's brother consulted me before making decisions, the way my parents included me in conversations with sincerity rather than obligation, and the way Mara herself, while still testing boundaries occasionally, had begun to internalize the lessons I had imposed through patience and evidence. One quiet afternoon, Mara approached me again, this time without any pretense or calculated charm. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she said, her voice unusually soft. "I realize how much I hurt you, not just with words, but with assumptions, manipulation, and disrespect. I want to do better, truly." I studied her carefully, noting the difference between this and her previous attempts at reconciliation. There was honesty in her posture, in the way her hands trembled slightly, and in her eyes. I nodded. "Actions speak louder than words," I said calmly. If you truly want to change, your actions will show it consistently. I'll observe as I always have. This moment marked the beginning of real reconciliation. Mara's attitude shifted gradually over the following months. She began taking responsibility for her actions, acknowledging when she erred, and consulting me in matters that previously would have been underhanded attempts at manipulation. It was a subtle but profound change, a testament to the power of strategy, patience, and calculated confrontation. The family as a whole also began to display deeper understanding. Conversations became more inclusive, and I was treated as an equal, not merely a financial or emotional resource to be exploited. My boundaries were respected, my generosity no longer assumed, and my presence valued genuinely. Even extended relatives began acknowledging the transformation, often expressing admiration for the way I had handled years of betrayal with composure and strategic intelligence. Despite this progress, I remained vigilant. I knew the habits, especially those ingrained over decades, could resurface. I continued to document inconsistencies, maintain clarity in communication, and assert boundaries without anger or impulsiveness. My empowerment wasn't just about reclaiming authority, it was about ensuring a lasting, sustainable shift in family dynamics. And yet, amidst all this, a surprising sense of relief washed over me. I had turned what could have been a lifelong burden into a series of lessons in resilience, strategy, and self-respect. Mara's family had been forced to confront the truth, to acknowledge their mistakes, and to adjust their behavior. The exposure of betrayal had not only altered my position within the family, but had also transformed me into someone who could face manipulation, deception, and mockery without losing dignity or control. The journey had been long, painful, and emotionally charged. But as I looked back, I realized that every step, the careful observations, the patient confrontations, the strategic reveals, had built a foundation of empowerment and clarity that no one could undermine. I had turned betrayal into opportunity, humiliation into strength, and manipulation into a lesson in enduring self-respect. The final months of this journey solidified a profound transformation, not only in Mara's family, but within myself. Where once I had been mocked, dismissed, and taken advantage of, I now stood firmly in a position of respect, authority, and clarity. Mara's attempts at manipulation had dwindled, replaced with genuine accountability. The family had learned, often painfully, that my generosity had limits, and that integrity and honesty could not be assumed or ignored. One evening, Mara approached me one last time. "I want you to know, I've truly changed," she said, her voice sincere and steady. "Not because you forced it, but because I realized what I was doing was wrong. I hope we can rebuild some trust." I looked at her carefully, seeing the difference between this and her previous half-hearted apologies. "Trust," I replied, "is earned over time through consistent actions, honesty, and respect. I'll observe that. Actions, not words, will prove it." She nodded, accepting the truth, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us. The family as a whole had transformed as well. Even my parents, who had once been passive observers of the mockery and manipulation, had begun to treat me with genuine respect. They consulted me, valued my opinions, and acknowledged my contributions without resentment or skepticism. The children continued to see me as a stable, reliable figure, someone they could trust implicitly, free from the complicated dynamics of adult manipulation. Through it all, I realized the power of strategy, patience, and observation. By documenting behavior, responding with calm authority, and enforcing boundaries consistently, I had reclaimed my dignity and established a lasting shift in relationships that had once been defined by betrayal. I had turned humiliation into empowerment, deception into clarity, and manipulation into an enduring lesson in self-respect. Looking back, I understood that this journey had been about much more than family dynamics. It had been a test of patience, of emotional intelligence, and of strategic thinking. I had been forced to navigate betrayal and exploitation, but I emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and undeniably respected. I had learned that power doesn't come from anger or vengeance. It comes from awareness, consistency, and the courage to act decisively when necessary. As I stepped away from the past, I felt a sense of liberation. The years of mockery and betrayal could no longer define me. Mara and her family had learned lessons they would not forget, and I had secured not just respect, but autonomy, self-confidence, and a deeper understanding of human behavior. I had turned adversity into opportunity, and in doing so, I had finally reclaimed my life on my own terms. The path had been long, emotionally charged, and filled with unexpected revelations, but the outcome was undeniable. I had transformed the story of my own exploitation into a story of empowerment, strategy, and lasting self-respect. And as I looked forward, I knew that no one could ever again underestimate me, dismiss me, or take my kindness for granted. I had emerged victorious, not through revenge, but through clarity, patience, and unwavering resolve.